According to a 2015 Telegraph article, a Saudi property millionaire was cleared of raping an 18-year-old girl. He managed to convince the jury that he accidentally slipped into her vagina.
It would appear so from the reports.
That's horrible. What is the psyche behind these individuals, and is there something that society is not seeing?
Well, the interesting thing that I have often noticed is that
Sex crimes, sick husbands, and chikopek Grab drivers. In this session, we are joined by expert criminal lawyer Suang Wijaya to talk about how sexual offenders get away. According to a 2015 Telegraph article, a Saudi property multimillionaire was cleared of raping an 18-year-old girl. He managed to convince the jury that he accidentally slipped into her vagina.
it would appear so from the reports. He must have convincingly looked into the jury's eye and told them before this he already had consensual sexual intercourse with a 24-year-old girl in the same room. From that incident, he already had semen on his hands. And then thereafter, he told the jury that this 18-year-old girl seduced him and pulled him to her. And this 18-year-old girl took his semen-covered hands and put it at her vagina. And that must be where the semen in her vagina came from. In the fracas of the matter, his pants were partially unzipped, and because it was dark, he slipped as well, and perhaps that could also be where his thing also may have slipped in.
But let's go into like mechanics, right? A guy needs to be hard to slip into a hole. How can the jury actually believe that he was not like turned on or something and he just accidentally slipped into her?
It could well be that the complainant did not actually testify that the hard thing was inside her, that it came into contact with her.
Now, Suang, I'm not fully convinced about the Saudi multimillionaire story, but let's move on to something that's really trending in the news of Dominique Pelicot, French guy, who has for many years invited strangers to his home to rape his wife. Now, it feels horrible as a woman to think that, hey, this guy that you have cooked for, loved, had a long time marriage with, has actually been setting up strangers to take advantage of you, to drug you, to infiltrate what you call as a home and turn it into such an unsafe place. In these instances, Suang, what are your thoughts as a criminal lawyer?
This case really eerily reminds me of a very similar case that came on the news in Singapore 2 years ago. In that case, this husband A, similar to Dominique Pelicot, regularly drugged his wife and would invite his friends or acquaintances into these parties or sessions where they would rape or sexually assault his wife. I actually acted for one of those whom A invited to sexually assault his wife. Eventually, I believe all of the accused persons, including my client, pleaded guilty to sexual assault and tried seeking lower sentences.
So now, Suang, when a person who has been charged with a criminal offense comes up to you and says like, hey, I want representation, do you ever feel morally conflicted as to whether you should represent this person or not?
There were indeed many times where you feel morally conflicted, and sometimes you look at the case facts and on its surface you feel this initial sense of immediate disgust or feel extremely disturbed. But when you get to know the client much more as a person, sometimes you understand much greater details, much greater layers to his story than the case facts would otherwise present. Sometimes you may find out facts which perhaps may not excuse their acts, but may possibly be of some sort of mitigating value to the court or allow you to better understand the person.
What is the psyche behind these individuals, and is there something that society is not seeing?
Well, the interesting thing that I have often noticed is that when these clients present to me and I converse with them, they don't talk like monsters. They behave totally like normal people with worries and, of course, extremely stressed. And sometimes they can have strange reasons for doing what they did, which it's difficult for us to put ourselves into their shoes, but it's their reality for that moment in doing the thing. And somehow they just felt this urge or this thrill to just do it when actually it doesn't necessarily give them much pleasure at all. Of course, all of this is not excusing their behavior at all, but these are just certain patterns that I see.
I've got a tricky question to ask you. If your client admits to you that they have sexually assaulted someone, molested someone, raped someone, do you have any ethical obligation to tell the court? Or are you allowed to defend and try to prove that he's not guilty?
In this situation, my ethical obligation is quite clear. I do not have an obligation to tell the court information that my client does not authorize me to tell, because that's covered by attorney-client privilege and confidentiality. However, I do have a very clear ethical, legal professional obligation that I cannot run a story in court that contradicts what my client tells me.
Wow.
So in this situation, normally if the client actually admits to you the facts that give rise to the offense, you as a lawyer will have no choice but to advise them that they do not have a legal defense. The best you can do is to act for them and mitigate for them, but they have to plead guilty, and you put out all the mitigating or downplay the aggravating factors to try to get a more favorable sentence. In the event that they insist that you put forward a story that contradicts what they tell you, you have no choice but to say, I cannot.
Got it. Now let's talk about another story in Singapore. There's a Grab driver that sent home a girl from a bar to her home. And then he, according to the story, turns around and suddenly he found that they were kissing. And there was some sexual intercourse that happened. And this is an uncle. This girl is very young. So for some reason they were kissing, and then after that she started saying, oh, I don't do this anymore. And I think at 4:30 a.m. another Grab driver found her along the street, very drunk, without panties, passed out. The Grab driver was also not found to be guilty. And what could have gone on that I missed out that allows this Grab driver to go away without any charges?
Well, one very important feature of this case, which you may not see so emphasized in the news articles, is there was actually medical experts who came to court to testify to two undisputed matters. Number one is they elaborated on the concept of alcohol-induced blackout. They explained that alcohol-induced blackout is not passing out. It is simply where you are so intoxicated to such a degree that you don't even remember what you do to begin with. You don't form a memory of what you are doing. But just because you don't form a memory of what you are doing at that moment doesn't mean that you are not conscious for a time being. So the psychiatrist actually explained that they can actually hold conversations, do some purposeful things, look completely well, but because of the effects of alcohol, simply not be forming any memory of what they're doing. And it follows from that from their ability to act, to make decisions, to speak and to do things, that they have capacity to do serious things, including sexual matters. The other undisputed fact was that alcohol could have a disinhibiting effect. You would do things you don't normally do.
From a moral ethical perspective, it seems to me that this uncle was trying to take advantage of a girl who was intoxicated. I don't know, Singapore is supposed to sell itself as a safe country.
Yes.
And if we're safe on drugs, we're safe on even vaping, right? But then I can't be safe from the psychopath Grab driver. I just don't feel that safe anymore. So how do we juggle all these different principles and be convinced that this is the right decision?
This case shows that you may need to look at the precise details. So on its surface, it looked like the Chikopek uncle was just taking advantage of a girl who was clearly intoxicated. There were, however, actually audio recordings. There was CCTV that showed that the complainant had greater degree of consciousness and awareness than perhaps the surface news would say. So what were perhaps some of the things which the judge actually looked at and was troubled at in looking at this case? One factor was that this complainant testified in court that she didn't want to seem too unwell to her friends because her friends would insist on taking the trouble to send her home if she looked too unwell. So she was able to have that capacity of thinking to not appear too unwell to them. And the audio tapes
Yeah.
actually recorded a fair amount of moaning during the alleged sexual acts. And
Maybe she was in pain.
submissions made by the defense was that they didn't sound like pain or resistance. And remember, the judge here, his task is not to find that he believed the Grab driver. His task is to think about whether there's a reasonable doubt. And here, he just couldn't be sure that she didn't consent.
Anyway, would that be a possible avenue for the girl to actually have sued Grab? He couldn't win on criminal grounds, then maybe on the civil or contractor grounds.
Perhaps if, for example, the hiring platform has terms and conditions that are spelled out more broadly than the criminal legal pigeonholes. If indeed the terms and conditions impose more obligations as opposed to the criminal law, then the victim could possibly commence suit by saying that perhaps there was no rape in the technical sense, but there was a breach of certain terms of treating me with respect and courtesy.
I think what we understand from our discussion is sometimes there's much more than meets the eye. And even with sexual offenders, whilst we feel intuitively grossed out by them, they still build up the story, and everyone needs to have their stories heard. But for girls and ladies out there, including men, by the way, since there's a men toilet incident, try not to get too drunk. Get yourself home safe. And if you do drink, you can take Grab. But just remember to tell your Grab driver no. See you next time. Bye.